This is Barbara Jagan, and today I am interviewing Virginia Milano for the Louisville Historical Museum. And we're pleased to be here. It's February 16th, 2015. And Virginia, I'm going to ask you a few introductory questions, and then we'll get into our conversation.
Okay.
So first of all, I'd like your full name, including your maiden name, when you were born, and where.
Okay. My name is Virginia May DeSantis Milano. I was born here in Louisville with a midwife. I have lived in Louisville all my life. I will be 80 years old in April. I have had a wonderful, wonderful life experience.
Well, let's hear about some of it. I'd like to start really with how about your grandparents? Are they the first ones to come here?
My grandparents moved here, were here. Yes, my grandfather was from Italy, and this is my grandmother. And my grandfather, we did not know this until many, many years later, that he had left a family in Italy.
Oh, okay. How old was he when he came? Do you know?
He was, no, I don't know how old he was, but I'll tell you what happened. I used to go with my dad all the time. Every time he went any place, I went with him. And one day, he and I and my grandfather went to Longmont. And we were driving up, and my dad turned down on 3rd Street and went down a couple blocks. And as a child, I might have been 6. As a child, I saw this big brick building, and I thought it was humongous, but it wasn't. And it had a big tall fence around it. And inside were all these men that looked like prisoners.
Wow, in Longmont?
And what it was were the Italian prisoners that they had captured. And my grandfather had heard that his son was taken captive there at that prison. So he and my dad went to the fence and talked to a few guys, and no, his son was not there. And nothing was ever said about it. It was just like it didn't happen.
This was during World War II?
Yes, yes. And the area where my grandfather lived and owned property, they had a farm. My dad's family had a farm, and he had brothers there, and yeah. And so he wasn't there. We didn't talk about it at all, and I always remembered that story. And one day I said to my dad, "Daddy, one day you and I and Grandpa went to Longmont, and we went to this big building," and I was explaining, and he looked at me and he says, "You remember that?" And I says, "Yeah, what were we doing there?" He says, "Don't you ever mention that to anybody." And I said, "Why? Who were we looking for?" And he says, "We were looking for Grandpa's son."
Who would have been from Italy?
From Italy, yeah. And we said, "Oh my goodness sakes." Well, come to find out, yes, he had left a family there. And it was a common thing. A lot of people did that. A lot of guys did that. They came here to get work, and some were married, some weren't. But he got with my grandmother, and see, we didn't know any of this until a cousin started to do a genealogy. And she could not find any proof of my grandma and grandpa being married. And evidently they didn't. They just got together.
So what was his name, your grandfather?
Angelo Di Pietro. And her name was Carmela Santilli. But her husband died, and there are some Santillis in town still.
Did she grow up here, or did she come from Italy?
No, she came from Italy also. They had a big family that came here. She had sisters, and they my father was born in a little town called Canzano. It was close to Rome. And they had a farm, and they built a big house and intended for all their boys to stay there. But my grandfather, well, the day my aunt was going to get married. And my grandfather had had a stroke, and he couldn't walk. And they were going to go across this mountain into this little village to get the pasta for the wedding. And it's that pasta that's in that turquoise box with the little woman with the wheat. You see it at the store.
Oh, yes. And
okay,
so it's
that's
made
the
there,
city.
and that's
yes,
the city
it's
there.
where it's made. Ah. And the kumbits for the wedding. And my dad they had a donkey and a cart, and my grandpa was in the cart. Well, it had rained, and it had washed part of the mountain down. And it was getting darker, and the donkey must have gotten spooked. My dad was only 14 years old. He didn't know. He didn't know. And the donkey got spooked, and it reared up and dumped the cart, and the cart went over the mountain, or down the hill, down the side of the mountain. And my dad kept calling my grandpa, and he couldn't see, and Grandpa didn't answer, so my dad ran into town real quick, and he tried to get someone to come and help him, and they didn't believe him. They thought it was just a prank. So he went back, and he sat there, and in the morning he went back to Canzano and got my uncle, and they came, and my grandfather was dead. He had broken his neck. And in Italy, when you die in a town or a province or whatever they want to call it, you have to be buried there. Well, now here was his daughter just going to be married. And what were they going to do? Well, they had to get his body, bring him there. They had a burial. They had the wedding. After the wedding, they went and got his body and brought it back to Canzano and buried him in the family plot. But that's what my father experienced. Now, that had to be very, very, very traumatic for him. He never talked about it. And we lost a daughter in 1980. It was an accident in our home. And Anna Marie was 18 years old, and she had forgotten the keys to the house. And she attempted to go through the basement window, and she hung. And we found her, and I had never, ever seen my dad so torn up. It brought back memories to him, sad memories.
Of his father's death.
Because they said she broke her neck, and his father broke his neck. And he had a horrible, horrible time. And then after the funeral was over, that was the end of it. They were able to do that. They didn't dwell. I guess they did internally, but they didn't dwell on anything like that, And,
so when did your grandfather marry Carmelita? That was in Italy?
They never did marry. We have no...
Did they come separately?
Yes, she was here, and then he came. And my grandmother, her husband had died, Mr. Santilli, and she lived on Front Street. And my grandmother, I guess, was an outstanding cook. So she took in boarders. And my grandpa moved in, and she took care of him, and then they got together, and they had 3 kids. And my mother was a twin, and her sister's name was Mary. My mother's name was Rose. And they both lived here in town. Then I had an Uncle Nicky, who was killed in the mine when he was 18 years old. He used to pick up the train right there
Was
on
that
Front
your
Street.
father's
No,
brother
that
or
was
your
my
mother's?
brother.
Okay.
And my grandmother, she says, I packed my son's lunch and send him off to work, and they bring me back his clothes, and that's all she had. He just took.
Do you know the address?
It's
Of
down
where-
on about, let's see, 600 Front, somewhere in there. Yeah.
Is the house still there?
Oh, yeah. It's been remodeled. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep, it's still there.
And is the little place, the house next or whatever where she had the borders?
She had another little house that
Yeah.
was just 2 rooms, and that's where they would sleep. And then she had a pantry, a shanty. We called them, they called them shanty. And it was right out her back door, and she had a coal stove in there, and that's where she cooked.
Oh, really?
Yes, she cooked in that.
So they were actually borders where they were eating,
sleeping, and she did their laundry,
was-
and that's how she made a living. And they had a cow, and they had chickens, and they would sell the milk. The kids couldn't drink it. They needed that quarter. My mother always tells the story of it was snowing one day, and they had to go deliver the milk, and she dropped a bottle and broke it. And when she came home, my grandfather, just smacked her a good one. They just had, simple lives.
Yeah.
Was this house located over by where the old post office was? Over by Virginia Chavez's, around in that area?
No, it's further north.
And this
It's
is Jane
further
Morgan
north.
speaking.
Okay.
Further
ahead, Jane.
north, quite a bit further.
It wasn't Little
You
Italy.
go down Caledonia. Caledonia comes east and west in town. Caledonia is more north. And you come down Caledonia, cross Main Street, go just 1 block because you'll come to the track, turn right, and it's the 3rd house.
Is this in Little Italy?
No,
No.
it's
Okay.
not.
Thank you.
So your father then was Rocco? Was that
Rocco.
Rocco.
R-O-C-C-O. And my son is Rocco.
Okay.
We had a son, excuse me, and we named him Rocco.
So your father, how did he meet your mother?
Then he was a boarder. He and his cousin, Tom DiGiordano, and my dad came and lived with my grandmother. Well, now here were these 2 beautiful girls and twins, and
And here were these 2 young men,
yes,
brothers.
my Uncle Tom went for my Aunt Mary. My mom was of the 2, the quiet one. My Aunt Mary was a feisty one. And my Uncle Tom
Like her mother.
Yeah. Yes. My Uncle Tom and Auntie got together. They got married first. And then my dad and my mother got married. And it's funny how they both started their first months of their marriage in this little house that was no running water, nothing, just two rooms. And that's where they lived. Then my dad moved a house from Superior. They had a coal mine camp up there. And he moved a house there, and he put it on Jefferson, on the 1200 block of Jefferson. And he fixed it up, and my mother and dad had 2 children then, and then I came along 5 years later. Well, it was only a 2-bedroom house, and it was not very big, but my dad had bought more lots. And so he said to my mother, well, we're going to build a house, and he built a house. And see, his family came from Italy, and they were masons. They laid brick and that was their type of work. So a cousin of mine that lived in Frederick, Vincent Ciccarelli, he came over and he stuccoed my dad's house and built this. We had a very nice
Do you
house.
remember the address on
Yes, it's
Jefferson?
1208 Jefferson.
Jefferson. Okay.
And then the
And I presume that house is still there.
it's still there.
Uh-huh.
Yes, it is. And then I grew up in that house because we moved in that when I was a baby. But I was born in the house on 1200 Jefferson. And when my father died, he had remodeled. Well, when I graduated from high school, and Dick and I got married right away. We graduated in June and got married
From
in August.
Louisville High School?
Right out of high school, got married. And my dad, the house had steps, and my mom we had been in an automobile accident. It was hard for her to go up and down the steps, and he said to her, I'm going to build you another house. And she says, well, that's nice. So my dad built a house, and it was all on one ground, no steps, nothing. Oh, she just loved it. They sold the house that we grew up in, and they lived there, and it was beautiful, had a great big window.
The one that he moved from Superior, did that have bathrooms and interior or anything like that?
No, nothing. No running water, nothing. He put water and electricity, and when Dick and I got married, we lived in that house, and there was no bathroom.
Did you have an outhouse?
That my mother and dad had an outhouse, but I wasn't going to go in an outhouse. I went to my mom and dad's house to go to the bathroom.
Went next door.
Yeah, no, I would not. But then we bought this property, and we were in the process. We only lived there about 8 months, and then we decided to build a house. Now, how? We were 19 years old, no money. When I was 13, I was in an automobile accident with my mother and dad. We were going to see the movie Blue Skies with
sure. Is that Bing Crosby or
Bing Crosby, and it had rained, and the milk truck was going down the lane, and instead he couldn't get through because the road was muddy. He backed out, and he backed right into my dad's car and hit our car.
Was that in Louisville?
No, it was on Arapahoe.
Okay.
On Arapahoe. And so I got a settlement of $850. Oh, that.
Quite a bit of money in those days.
Oh, boy. And, of course, my mom and dad just put it away, and that was it, in the bank. And then when we got married, I always told Dick he married me for my money. And so then we had $1,300 between our wedding and what we got. And Mrs. Lawrence, Ethel Lawrence, lived right next door.
You said she was the custodian or something at the school?
She and her husband both were the custodians at the Louisville High School.
Okay. Oh.
But us kids used to help her.
Mm-hmm.
The girls would go in and clean the bathrooms. Can you believe that? Can you see girls doing that?
I can't see them doing it now.
No. And he was a very small man, and she was a big German lady. Boy, English, German, I don't know what she was, but she was a big, well, he got very sick, and then he died in 1953. And she was left with a lot of doctor bills. And I had never been on this end of town. I didn't have a car growing up. We never had any friends. My family had no friends. I didn't even know this end of town even.
So we're talking about 4 blocks from downtown, but you had not
did.
been up here.
Never did. Can you believe that? And so one night we were coming home. Dick was a fireman, and they had a fireman's auxiliary, and the gal across the street was there, and I brought her home after the meeting. And I looked over here and I says, "Pal, who owns that land over there?" And she says, "Mrs. Lawrence." And I said, "Gee, I wonder if she'd want to sell it. We want to build a home." And she says, "Well, I don't know. You can ask her." So I called her. And she said, "Well, come on up and we can talk about it." And she told me then that she had a lot of doctor bills and that it would have really helped if she could sell this. And she was asking $1,500 for 3 lots, 75 by 125. And all I had was $1,300. And I says, would you take $1,300? And she says, oh, I suppose, since I know yous and I know you'd be good neighbors, yes.
Helping clean the...
Yeah, there you go. And so she sold it to us. And my husband and my father, we went down to Steinbach's. We bought a book off of the rack. We opened it up.
How to build a house.
How to build a house. Now, what did we know about building? But my dad had, when he wasn't working in the mines, and he quit in 1953 and went to being a carpenter.
You said he had built his house.
That is how we were able. So we get these blueprints. We built this house. My dad and Dick took a week off, and they had the whole house framed. We had the whole dug, the cement poured, the cement walls and the floor. And the rest, they framed it all. And I will never forget the people when we start building this house. People didn't build brick homes anymore, you know. And I said, well, we want it to be brick. Oh, boy. And I bet the people thought we had the money, you know. We didn't. Well,
Where did you get the brick? Do you know? Do you remember?
In Boulder at that brickyard.
The brick. I was wondering.
Oh, yes,
the brickyard there.
That's where we got the brick.
Right along the railroad tracks.
Yeah, yep, right there. Yep, we sure did. And we brought the brick. Now, what did we know about building a house? I just look at that and I go, what, you know, I have a grandson that's 24. That kid no more could even get married, let alone build a house. I look at
people get married a little later. They don't get married at 19 all the time now.
I think he'll get married a lot later. And then my 33-year-old, he's pretty much the same. They just, I don't know. It's different.
Yeah, sure.
But boy, we just took it by the bootstrings and up we came. And look at this. I mean,
it's beautiful.
It's a beautiful home.
Very
and
nice.
this is all plaster.
So
not
on McKinley were most of the houses already built except for that property that she had?
Yeah, we were the only ones here. Yeah, this was the only lot here. Next door was a woman, Mrs. Stout, and she owned a lot of land. Her family owned land, and she had just a little old shack, and she remodeled it 2 or 3 times. And then her son Jack and Lorella bought it from them, and they remodeled. And we were.
So the 700 block of McKinley was already pretty.
Oh yes.
Pretty built.
Oh yeah.
You just hadn't been.
J.J. Steinbach built that house right there on the corner, and then his son Herb Steinbach built this house, which is nothing like what it was. It was just a little square box, and these people, 3 years ago, came in and bought that house and spent, oh Lord, and gutted it all but one wall, and look at that beautiful home. I love it. I think it's just, and they're wonderful neighbors, just the most wonderful. 2 children, and they love it here. They just love it.
So the
neighborhood hasn't changed much. Mrs. Lawrence's house, now, you know who lives there is Jeff and Heather Lewis.
Okay.
And Heather is into the history and all of that.
Yes.
And she just loves that house. And her father is a pretty good sized man. He said he couldn't come in here. He felt claustrophobic. It felt like the but they remodeled it, and it's a lovely.
What was the street like when you built?
It was dirt. We didn't have curbs.
But you had sewers here?
Well, in 1953, they started putting sewers in. As a matter of fact, our very best friend, Alex Chaucer, Chaucer's lived right down the street. Their son was working for the outfit that did this, and there was a cave-in, and he was killed.
From a mine underneath, or?
Something happened on well, this is all mines underneath
right,
here. Yeah, I really don't know what that was about, but he was crushed and killed. And he and his girlfriend Dolores, we got married in August, and they were getting married in September.
Well, some sad stories along with all the good things happening.
Very sad.
So did you go to St. Louis school?
I went 8 years to St. Louis school.
Tell us about that. Do you remember any of the teachers or the nuns?
Do I remember the teachers? We had a Sister Canada. She couldn't have been any taller, excuse me, than that. A sweet lady. We had 3 big rooms. First, second grade was in one, third, fourth in another, and fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth, I think. I don't remember how it was split up. It could have been 3 to 3. And then we had what they called a lodge room, where it was for meetings, and we practiced singing and stuff like that.
Was that the Red Man's Lodge, or?
No.
Okay.
No, this was where the Catholic school is now.
Okay.
And then we had a nun named Sister Ermelinda. And Sister Ermelinda, well, when you're this tall, I remember, she was a big woman, but I don't think she was real tall, but she looked like a monster.
Looked like it to you.
She was, when she'd take her finger and go like that to pull her hair away from her little habit that they wear, well, we knew we better get moving because she was on.
That was a sign.
Yeah. She was known to hit kids. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sister Melinda.
With a ruler?
Hmm?
Would she hit with a ruler?
Oh, yes.
Would they use it flat or on the edge?
Flat. Mm-hmm. And if you weren't holding your pencil just right, you got it.
How many in one grade? How many students?
There were 8 in our class. Dick and I both went to the Catholic school.
Were you in the same class? Yeah, because you said you were both 19 when you got married.
Yeah, we went through our 8 years of the Catholic school. Then we went to high school, and then in our junior year, sophomore year, he asked me to homecoming, and we went, and it went from there. And we've been married it'll be 62 years in August. And lots of hills and valleys in those 62 years, but they've been wonderful years.
Did you have some favorite teachers at the high school?
Yes. Oh, yes. In high school, yeah, we had some really good. My husband's would be Coach Nuttall. He was a football coach, and he was just like a father to all the boys. And our home ec teacher, her name was Mrs. McDonald. And she was a sweet lady, very nice lady. And then we had a Miss Wagner. She taught business, and she was an old maid. She had never married, and she wore her hair in a bun. It was wavy. And she and her sister lived together, and they had adopted a girl. And I don't know if there was someone in their family, but they raised this girl. She was a wonderful, wonderful lady. Very wonderful. I had a good experience in high school. I was the drum majorette for the band.
Okay.
I was tall and thin. And
what kind of outfits did you wear?
Oh, they were beautiful. It was all white pants and big fluffy things on the shoulder, and I had a hat that was that big. And I'll never forget, we were competing in Boulder, and I had to bring the band to a stop, and what you do is you go like this and hold up the thing and then come down, and I got the tip of the hat and it came down.
Right over your face.
I said, I think 4 points probably got taken off of that. But it was fun.
Did you march in the parades in
Yeah.
Louisville?
Oh, yes, yes. Well, that was all what we did. You just did it.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I had a white. I got a picture of me around here someplace. I got to get that out and show my grandkids. I haven't always been a gray-haired fat grandma. I had a life before this. I got to find that picture.
So, do you want to go back to when you were living next to your parents, and then also after you built this house and things? But talk about some of the other people you knew, and when we mentioned Doc Cassidy before. Talk a little bit about.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you. Well, when I got married, Dick was going to CU. Mm-hmm. He was an engineering student, and there was no loans, anything. But my mother and father let us live in their house free, okay, and we would pay the taxes for the year, and that was $85 a year for the taxes. That's all we had to pay. I was working at Rocky Flats. I was a secretary to George Carroll in the purchasing department, and I made $185 a month, and we lived on that. But then Dick worked part-time at the filling station for Joe Colaci. Joe Colaci was his godfather.
Oh, okay.
And my mother-in-law and the Colacis, my mother-in-law and father-in-law and the Colacis were very, very close.
So their filling station was the one on the corner
and
of Pine
he worked at the filling station.
In Maine.
Dick worked at the filling station. And Joe paid him, and that was how we got by. Well, then, after a year and a half, I decided I wanted to have a baby. Now, what were you thinking, Virginia? A baby? You have a husband in college? So that meant, and I got pregnant, and that meant Dick had to quit school, and we had a friend who owned a packing company, and his first, he worked at the Shell Oil company when we first got married, and then he went to school, and he was being a full-time student. Then he went to work for Platt Packing. It's a family that lived here in town, so he got Dick a job, and he worked there a couple of years. I had the baby. Then my dad decided, well, you can't live in that house. It doesn't have a bathroom. You got to build a house. So we built the house.
There you go. Where was your first child born? At home?
In Boulder.
In Boulder.
Mm-hmm.
Community hospital or?
Oh, yeah. Community hospital.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That was Lori, Lorette, Laurette. And she had a head of hair just like our great-grandbaby. And I will never forget, in those days, you didn't just come to the hospital and visit. You had to make appointments if you came in different hours. They had visiting hours, but if you couldn't make that. So Dick had to make appointments because he was working nights. Yeah.
Did Doc Cassidy, did he deliver babies?
Oh, no.
That was before.
No, he just gave shots.
He'd
come to the house.
Did he go to the house?
One time Dick was real sick, and I called him. And I said, and he'd walk in, he was so sweet. He'd walk in and he'd whisper and he'd call you Mom. Mm-hmm. He says, Mother or Mom, do you have a pan with some water? And I thought, And I said, yeah. He says, well, you put it on the stove and get it boiling. He put his needle in there to give Dick a shot. Yes. Yes.
Was he about the only doctor in town at the time?
Oh, yeah, that was it. We had him. Then when Dr. Bach came a few years later, which quite a few years later
then you had two doctors in town.
Then we started going to Dr. Bach.
Was Dr. Cassidy still?
Oh, yes. And his house, Mrs. Cassidy was the most delicate woman you ever met. And Mrs. Lawrence cleaned house for Mrs.
Oh, really?
Yeah, she cleaned Dr. Cassidy's house. And she used to have her clothes tailor-made. And she bought some of the most beautiful fabrics. And she gave fabric to Mrs. Lawrence, and Mrs. Lawrence gave it to me, and I still have that at 60 years old downstairs in the basement.
So did she have family money,
She
or
has-
was the
I
doctor
think
actually
they might-
making enough money to?
Oh, I'm sure he was
Yeah.
making money. Yes, I'm sure
Uh-huh.
he was making money. But he was also, they had one child, Peter, and she would come out all dressed up. And one day, his girlfriend, two girlfriends and I, we were the only 3 girls in the class, we might have been in the 6th or 7th grade, we put our heads together, and we decided we were going to go get our ears pierced from Dr. Cassidy. And so we went up there. We're sitting there waiting, and Mrs. Cassidy would always come out and talk to you. And she'd say, "Well, girls, and what are you here to see the doctor for today?" And we said, "We're going to get our ears pierced." And she says, "Oh, how lovely." She says, "Does your mother know that?" We said, "Oh, yes."
Did your mother know that?
No. And she says, "Oh, well, okay, he should be through in a minute." His room, you walked up the steps, you went into this little room, and on this side was a big window, and she had a fern in there that was humongous. I mean, it was just hung over. That's what I remember. Then it had, which I had never seen before, a swinging door to her kitchen. You know, and she'd push that door and come. I thought that was just so wonderful. And then over here, she had French doors that opened into this lovely formal dining room. Just lovely. And his office might have been from that picture to here. That's it. He opened that door. We all 3 looked at each other, got up, and ran out of there as fast as we could. We never got our ears pierced. We've talked about that so much.
Who was that? Who were your
Her
friends?
name
Are they?
is Shirley Anama.
Uh-huh.
She's Hellert now. And Yvonne Denigi. We went to school. We were in the same class. Yeah.
So you never got your ears pierced?
Not there then. Oh, heavens, no. He opened that door and he goes, "Well, young ladies, what can the doctor do for you today?" And we looked there and he said, "Nothing." And pulled him out the door with me. Oh.
He lived on McKinley near here, or what?
No, he's on the street below.
In Garfield?
Uh-huh.
Uh-huh.
He's up 3 blocks, I think it is, right in the corner. And I don't know who bought it, but they've remodeled it, and it's beautiful, beautiful.
Did his wife get along with the other women in town?
Oh, yes, she was just the sweetest thing there ever was. I sure never did know of anything. She was nothing. I'm sure the women thought she was just kind of like some kind of a princess. She was the doctor's wife.
Yeah, yeah.
That's how they regarded people.
Yeah.
You know, we were working class, never explored much. You know what I mean? The women, my mother and all her friends, what did they do? They cooked, they took care of their families, they all got together and they'd celebrate and have parties and play cards. And it was a good life.
Yeah.
It was a very good life.
Yeah. Were there special gatherings of the Italian group?
Oh, yeah. All my mother's friends were all Italian. Yeah. That's who they chummed with.
I'm not sure that I had, your father was Rocco, and your mother was Mary?
Rose DiPietro.
Rose, okay. Rose
DiPietro.
DiPietro. How do you spell that?
Capital D-E, capital P-I-E-T-R-O.
Okay. You have a lot, and there's another name that goes back to Italy, I guess, but Nicole DeSantis. Was your great-grandmother?
Nicole DeSantis.
I have a Nicole DeSantis. No, doesn't ring a bell? Okay. But what about the name, it's Digiallonardo.
DeGianardo. That was my aunt. That was my mother's twin.
Okay.
She married Tom DeGianardo.
Okay. I knew there was another Italian name in your background.
Nicole. Who would have been Nicole? I don't remember a Nicole.
Okay. They might have it wrong. And I have Nicholas was the brother that was killed in the mine accident.
He died at 18.
Was that?
Well, he was killed in the mine.
Was that in Louisville?
Mm-hmm. I couldn't tell you
Remember
what
which
mine.
one?
Excuse me.
Mm-hmm. I'm just looking at my notes and want to make sure that I've asked. Tell about your father. I understand from his obituary that he was on the fire department, a volunteer.
He was a volunteer fireman. He was a coal miner. He came to this country, and he worked with his brothers in the mines. And he was young, and my cousin, his oldest brother's daughter, used to say how my dad would send money back to Italy for them, and they were so appreciative because they had nothing. My dad was a very wise man. He knew how to make money and save money, and he liked to gamble a little bit. But
well, that was in Louisville too, wasn't it?
That was a big thing, and but he was a wise gambler. He knew, I'd hate playing cards with him. He knew what you had in your hand. You couldn't beat him. Could not beat him. He'd say, well, I'd put a card down. Why didn't you put the 5 down? How do you know I have a 5? You did. But anyhow, there used to be a few guys get together and they'd get, I'll never forget it. If he'd win money, he'd give it to my mother. And my mother was very frugal. Oh, she could make a $20 bill last forever. My dad says, you're nothing like your mother. Nothing. I give it and I spend it. So she would take the money and she'd roll it up in little pieces, and she had a Blessed Virgin and a Christ statue in her bedroom. Okay? And that's where she would put the money. Well, my daughter and my nephew, they were maybe 10, 11 years old, and they would clean for her. And those two little monkeys found that thing with the money in it. And they went down to Charlie's, the grocery store here in town. And a friend of ours used to work there. And she told her, we were cleaning in Grandma's bedroom today, and she's got money stuffed up in the Blessed Virgin statue. So Lucille called my mother. She says, I think you better move that money
for the bankers.
Know where it is. Isn't that cute?
Yeah, yeah. Did your mother like to cook?
Oh, yeah, she was a good cook.
What are remember some of the dishes that your family loved or liked a lot?
Oh,
some
yeah.
things she cooked?
The day that she died, the day before she died, she made apple dumplings.
Wow. Huh.
And she called us to go up and have apple dumplings. Now, I knew how much work it was. Oh, I was getting ready to go to work, and I had this to do and that to do. You know how you do.
Yeah.
And the next day, when I was getting ready to go to work, she called me and she said, Virginia, I think I got to go to the doctor. I'm really having a lot of problems today breathing. So I took her to Dr. Kirchhoff. She was allergic to morphine, and he gave her a shot of morphine. And we were coming right up here, got right here, and she started bleeding. Terrible. And I says, oh, Mom, it's okay, because she had been in the hospital with pneumonia in December. This was March. And she had oxygen, so we knew her nose was dry. So I got home, I called him, I said, my mom's nose is bleeding. He said, well, you know what to do, just pack it and put pressure on it. Besides, I thought, this isn't stopping, and so we called the rescue squad, and she died on the way over. Yeah.
And your father died?
My father died when he was 92. And that was just 20, well, he was born in 1904. So.
Was he living with you at the time?
No, he lived in the little house that he moved away from Superior. He remodeled it, and that's where he and my mom were living on the corner 1200 Jefferson. And then when he died, and then he built the house next to it, and he built that house, he built his house, he built this house, and then he built another house down in the block for my sister. And then he and his cousin built 2 houses in Westminster. He was a very intelligent man when it came time to knowing how to get something done. He just knew what to do. We were poor, but we didn't know it. You know what I mean?
Most people were.
Yeah, well, that's right. I mean, but we never ever felt deprived of a single thing. So, excuse me, I just shouldn't have been doing that, but I did.
It's all right.
What can I say?
This is informal.
Yes, thank you.
When did you start since you're known for your sayings, so to speak?
I've always had sayings. I mean, you know that it is what it is. I've been saying that for 30 years. I should have put it on a pillow. And maybe I'd have. Right. And life's not for sissies. That's one of my old ones. And, I have a lot of sayings. Yes, right now I can't think of anything.
Oh, of course.
Of course not.
What if you do, bring them in.
Yeah, I will. I've always thought of having a book, and I have a lot of do's and don'ts, you know. Don't leave toothpaste in the sink or hair. Always flush the toilet and put the seat down, because I had 4 or 5 boys, grandsons, and so I always told them I was going to make them a book of do's and don'ts. Listen to Grandma. They don't listen.
So how many children you had, you and Dick
We
had?
had 3. We had Lori, and then I couldn't get pregnant, and I lost 2 babies in between. And so the doctor decided that possibly it was best not to try to have any more. So we put our name in for adoption. We went through Catholic Charities. We had been all approved and everything. And so what I did is I started babysitting a baby. This woman worked at the university. Her name was Pauline Wallace, and she had a little girl, and I used to get paid $12 a week to babysit her. And it was more like for Lori to have someone to play with. And I'll never forget when we moved upstairs. We weren't up here yet, but we were up here one day, and across the street, the DeCarlos had 3 kids. And they were all out there making a snowman and everything. And I said to Lori, honey, what do you want for Christmas? And she says, a baby brother or a baby sister. Oh, I felt so bad. So that's when I started babysitting. So I had her for 2 years. And then lo and behold, I got pregnant. And then I was bedridden. Doctor wouldn't let me do anything. And I carried her full term. Him, that's my son. And then he was, they're 15 months apart. I go to the doctor and I says, I think I'm pregnant again. I said, oh my goodness, I don't want him this. He said, Virginia, you come crying you want him, and now you're crying you don't want him. I said, but not so close. So I had 5.5 years between Rocky and Lori,
Mm-hmm.
and 15 months between Lori and Anna Marie. But I managed.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
managed just
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah. And who lives around here? Rocco lives in
Rocky
Roseville.
lives here.
Mhm.
He lives up at right behind the rec center. And our daughter, when she got married, her husband was the wrestling coach at CU, Mike Sager. And he had just, he was doing an outstanding job. And that was the year that CU had some financial things, and they cut his program. Just cut.
I remember when they cut.
Yes, it didn't even
Cut
give
2 or
him
3
an
different
option to
sports.
whether he could have supported himself, nothing. So that was a big blow to him, but by golly, he took himself by the bootstrings and he got into real estate, and he was a very, very successful realtor. He passed away 11 years ago with colon cancer. The boys were young, and my daughter still stayed in their house, and then just last year, she sold her home in Boulder. It was a big 4-bedroom, 2-story house. It was too much for her to keep up. And she bought one of those condos over on 42 and Baseline. That little cove there, you know. Hers were the first ones built. Very, very nice. And she's living there now, so she's close.
And so you have some grandsons around also?
I have her son, her second son, Christopher, just got on with the sheriff. He's a deputy sheriff for Boulder, and he's living with her, but he and his girlfriend are in the process of buying a house. And then Richard is the oldest, and he lives in Longmont, like I said, with his wife. They bought a home, a small home, and they have their first child.
Your
And
first
he called-
great-grandchild.
Great-grandchild. And he called Monday morning, and he told his grandpa, he says, "Oh, Grandpa, we were coming home from Sterling, Akron. Her family is from Akron. And he was going about 70 miles an hour. And a deer jumped out and wrecked his car." He says, "Oh, Grandma, I was so scared." But we bought him a car seat for the baby when she was born. And of course, you know, car seats. What did we pay? $29 for them? You know,
Right.
not like that anymore. $300 and some. And he says, "Grandma, I want to tell you, that car seat did just what it was supposed to do. She never even woke up."
Oh my goodness.
He says she woke up when we took her out of the car seat to take her to
So none of them were hurt then?
None of them were hurt. So we were very, very lucky.
Yeah.
Very lucky. Yeah. And he's got to get a new car now, and those are all things. I'm getting a real, they're 33 and 32, and have been only the two of them, which that means they just do whatever they wanted to whenever they wanted to. And he called one day and he said to me, "Well, I think we're going to have to go get a new plan. We're going to have to work on doing some adjusting with her." And I said, "Oh," I says, "do you suppose maybe she's going to adjust you?" He says, "I think that's the way it is." But you know, these kids have everything.
Sure,
They graduated from Greeley, and he works in Longmont, so that's good. And she graduated from CU and works in Boulder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd like to talk a little bit about your husband's family.
My husband's family, yeah.
What you know about the Milanos and
Well, yes, my father-in-law was a wonderful man. I mean, everybody just loved Sam Milano. And my husband has the same personality as him. Yeah, very easygoing, never says much, but just very, very pleasant man. And she was 17, and it was a fixed marriage, like it was. She had a boyfriend, And she always tells us that she went and kissed him goodbye the day she married my father-in-law. And so, needless to say.
So had the Milanos come from Italy?
Yes. Oh, yeah. They lived in Little Italy.
Okay.
Her mother, there was, Josephine was the oldest. And then she had a sister named Julia. And then she had a sister named Annie. And another little sister, Angela. And then a brother, Sammy. And her father worked in the mine over there by Lafayette. Couldn't speak English. And it was during the time that there was the strike here in town.
Yes.
Okay? He was walking from his home in Frenchtown, and he walked through the field, and they brought in the militia to protect the
Yeah, we've been
mine.
reading about that.
And he walked by, and this guy said, halt. And he thought he said, hello. And he kept walking. And the guy shot him in the back and killed him.
Oh, boy. I don't think I've heard that story.
Yeah. That's never been in any of this paper.
Yeah.
My mother-in-law and father, they did not want that story out. They just thought that was awful. And it was, but it's history. It's what it was.
Yeah, what was his name?
His name, Gentile was his last name. Sam Gentile? I think that's what it was. Sam Gentile, Gentile. And so he didn't come home from work, and my grandmother said, well, what happened? He isn't home. So she called some of the guys and said, and he says, well, he didn't come to work today. And she says, no, he had to have, because he had left. They went out looking, found him in the field.
Now, this was in your family or the Milano family?
This is on the Milano.
Okay.
This is my mother-in-law's father.
Father, okay.
Yeah, yeah. So here was this woman with 5 kids, because my mother-in-law was married. She got married when she was 17, so she was out of the house, and so was Aunt Julia. But here was Grandma living in in this little house. How was she going to feed her family?
Wow.
So, do you know what she did? She was just a little woman, just a tiny little woman. She moved to Denver, and she worked for the railroad. She cleaned boxcars for the railroad.
Wow.
That's what she did.
Oh. Did she have any children at home still?
Yeah, 3.
3. So they moved with her to Denver?
They moved with her to Denver, and she bought a house on Pecos Street, and she raised those kids.
So she moved from one Little Italy to the Denver Little Italy.
Yes, she did. And she lived there. Then she married, Rocky used to call him when he would come in, the cutest little man. He was only about this tall, and he had white hair, and he always wore white shirts and black pants. He shuffled his feet. He was lazy. I guess he didn't work much, so he found a wife that took care of him, as Dick's uncle used to say. My Uncle Sammy, Josephine's brother, never cared for him. What was his name? Oh, isn't that... I've got his marriage license. Their marriage license in there. But anyhow... Well, then Grandma died. Grandma had a heart attack one night and died. Her name was Anna Marie. And that's what we named our daughter, Anna Marie.
Yeah.
That's where we got the name. And she died, so he was living in that house on Pecos Street. And Uncle Sammy lived 2 doors up, so my sister-in-law, or Josephine's sister-in-law, took care of him. And he'd come out and spend time with her and that, but my father-in-law didn't ever really like him too much, so They'd bring him back to Denver. But he'd come and he'd just sit here and he'd smile. And Rocky called him Old Papa Old. Because he was the cutest little guy.
So where was the house then that Dick grew up in? It was
In Frenchtown?
Yeah.
I mean,
Little.
I have no idea. Isn't that awful?
Well,
I
no,
never
it's not
asked
awful.
where she lived.
Mhm.
But there were other Milanos here. He had a brother, and there were other Milanos. And but he settled here. And they had 3 sons. And Anthony, he was on the corner of 42 and South Boulder Road, where that Christopher Village.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
They owned that and 80 acres over. Where that steel place is, that was all Milano's property.
Really?
My father-in-law would be rolling in his grave if he knew what they had done to his land.
So that whole area, did they farm it?
He farmed.
Uh-huh.
Yes. Oh, he loved his farm. He loved his farm. They would go out, he and Rocky'd pack a lunch, peanut butter and jelly, and they'd go out and get mushrooms. And he had tree stumps out there, and yeah, he farmed.
Well, did they sell it then? And
No, he had cows, and
Uh-huh.
they would,
Yeah.
and horses, not cows, just cows and chickens. And then he built a chicken farm, and they raised chickens and sold the milk.
But that would have not. Did they sell the property to someone else,
Yes.
and then that person or whoever sold it for a steel ranch?
Yes.
I mean,
They sold that.
so they didn't make the money off of selling it.
Oh, no. Can you believe they sold 80 acres of land for $30,000?
Do you know what year that was, or approximately?
1955.
Could you locate that for me? Are you talking about where the King Soopers shopping center is?
Across the street west.
Where they built all of the steel, it's called
Right
Steel
on the
Ranch, and all
corner,
those houses.
on the west side, right across. 42, it's on the west side of 42.
Okay,
They
northwest
owned that
corner.
all the
And
way
then all
through
the-
Steel. They owned out all of that to the railroad track.
All the way along 42 toward Baseline.
No, not
From,
right to Baseline.
from south, but
Where
that
the
way.
Steel
yeah,
Ranch
yeah.
is. That all
To Pascal.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
about half the way to Baseline, really.
Did they own that little stone house there
Oh,
at Pascal
yeah,
and
that
42?
was the milk house.
Oh,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I hate to see that one go.
A woman bought a piece of that land where the house was and turned it into a flower shop. It was real cute. They remodeled that house then, and my mother-in-law never, ever liked the farm. She did not like the farm. They didn't make money on it. All he did was work, and, but it's what he loved. He didn't care about money. He just wanted to be on his land. And she said to me one year, I've got 15 cows out there, but I can't take them to JCPenney's and shop and get anything. I mean, they had the stuff, but it was, couldn't use it. So she hated the farm. She just really hated it. So she started working for Kalachi's. Anthony Kalachi was her godchild. And she started working there, and she worked there till she was 76 years old.
Tell me her name again. Sorry.
Mm?
Tell me her name again.
Josephine Milano.
Josephine. Okay. Josephine.
Hard working
Oh.
lady. Oh. And you know what? I forgot to tell you this. When my father-in-law died, they would have been married 50 years in May, and he died in January. And we were just starting to make plans for a 50th. She said, well, that's just like him. She was so mad at him all the time. She just, oh, poor thing. Oh, they did interview with her, and I think it was through the society, and my sister-in-law Ruth had a copy of it, and she said, Virg, I don't even want to show this to Dick. She said, in the end, she says, I married the wrong man. And, you know, Dick, she says, well, what will Dick think? I said, we all knew it. They were married 50, lacking a few months of being married 50 years. And they fought like cats and dogs. Yeah, that was their relationship. Yeah. And she moved downtown.
But Dick ended up with more of his father's
demeanor.
demeanor.
Yes, thank you, Lord. Now, her oldest son, Anthony, was just like her. Very, he looked like her. He was just like her, real sharp-tongued. And he died when he was 76. And then he had a brother that lived in California. Wonderful man. He was a lot like Dick. And Leonard and Dick were very close. And he just died 4 years ago. And he was 92 when he died. See, she had the two older boys.
Yeah.
They were 16 and 18 years old when she had Dick. And her life was Dick. I mean, she adored him. She'd make him a cake and nobody else could have a piece.
Oh, my goodness.
No, they all hated Dick because he was so spoiled. But what parents do to their children, you know? And he was always a hoarder, and he had a tree house up in an old tree. And if they wanted to go to the movie and didn't have money, they'd ask Dick, and he'd go up in his treehouse, and he'd get the money, and they'd go to the movie. And people would say how he would be in the movie. You could hear him laughing. He was just nice man.
Did he finish college eventually? And
Dick?
Yeah.
No.
You said that he had left
2
school
years.
when you had.
And then he had a job at the Hilton Hotel as an electrician, and then he got on at IBM, and he did very well at IBM, very well. And he was a manager, and we had a good life, very good life.
And you didn't go back to work then after?
Oh yes, I went back when Anna Marie was in 5th grade. I went to work at the university, and I worked at the bookstore. During rush, my brother-in-law was the bookstore manager.
CU bookstore.
CU. And he was the bookstore manager, and I worked as a cashier, and I loved it. I loved being with the kids and all of that, and we had the old registers where you went like that and pulled down the arm, boy, and you had to know how to make change. Yeah.
Now, what year was that?
That would have been in 80, let's see, 72, 73, yeah. And I worked there. Then the state went to a state system when they had PERA, so you had to have a position. So a girl and I split a full-time position because neither one of us wanted to work full-time. So she worked 2 days a week, 1 week, and 3 days the next, and that's what we would do. It was wonderful.
It's a good arrangement.
Perfect. Yeah. Then the manager decided that he didn't need anybody at 8 o'clock in the morning because nobody was there, so he changed it and gave us a 5-hour day. And we didn't like that very well because we had a perfect setup.
Sure.
But anyhow, then I decided I'm going to take the test, so I went over and took the test, and I passed it. And I went to civil engineering. I worked at the bookstore for 6.5 years. And then I went to civil engineering, and it was just great. So that was before, because I was 12 years, so that would have been in 69. Yeah, because then I went to civil engineering,
So the university bookstore would have been a little earlier.
Earlier,
in
yeah,
the
that
60s.
was 6.5 years. Then
Yeah.
I went to the civil engineering, and I was there 6.5 years.
Mhm.
And then there was an opening downstairs for a secretary. I applied for it, and I got the job, and I worked there 9 years in electrical engineering. I was a secretary to 9 professors. I did all their technical typing, and I did their tests and typed them, and all their travel expenses and all that. Wonderful.
Probably met a lot of the students. And,
Oh,
but you met a lot of the international students.
Oh, well, yes, that's
because
all it is in graduate school.
Engineering graduate school,
Sure.
we hosted students, and they were
One
always
day I walked
always
out-
in engineering as graduate students. Yeah.
What engineering class? Where did you work?
No, I didn't work there. We hosted the students for
I see.
50 years.
Yeah, no. I walked out of my office one day, and out in the hall, there were 8 guys, and they were all foreigners
I believe it.
talking. I
Yeah.
said, boy, I
We
tell
go
you.
to the graduation. You know, they always had their separate engineering graduations, and
Yeah.
almost all the masters and doctorates went
we
to
would put
foreign
that
students.
on, buy all this food, and it was just wonderful,
Mhm.
wonderful, wonderful.
Mhm.
I had a wonderful job,
Yeah.
and the day I had to take a medical retirement, and so they put on the most beautiful party for me up in the dean's office, and of all the experiences I'd had working at the university, and there were many, wonderful, sad. I had remember how we used to buy that instant coffee and a tin?
Yes.
I had a tin, and I had quarters, dimes, and dollars in there. And if a student needed some money, they knew where it was.
Mhm.
They did not have to sign an IOU. If you got it, put it back. So every once in a while I'd put a $5 bill or them. I never once lost a cent from all of that. Those
Wow,
kids
what a
just
story!
did.
That's yeah.
So we had a kid from Spain. He was a wonderful boy, very handsome, and one of my professors was, he was intimidating. He was very brilliant. And that's what's sad. These people are so busy doing their research, and he was his advisor, but he always canceled, or he wasn't, and one day this Carlos came in and shut the door, and he started to cry, and he says, Miss Virginia, he says, I'm quitting school. I says, why? He says, every time I make an appointment with a professor, he cancels out, or he doesn't have time, and this and that. And I said, okay. I said, well, I'll tell you what, you come back. And I told him when to be here and what date. Boy, that afternoon I went in his office, and I said, do you know that Carlos wants to quit school? He says, why? I said, because you won't give him any of your time. He looked at me and he says, well, I don't think that's right, because I do. I says, you cancel a lot. Well, if I'm busy, I says, no, Bob, you've got to be here for that boy. He is very delicate right now, and you have to be there for him. You have an appointment with him. Well, he did, and Bob did a wonderful job. He kept saying it. The day of my party, Carlos came up to me and he gave me a hug, and he says, Miss Virginia, if it wouldn't have been for you, I never would have gotten my doctorate. That made me feel so
What a wonderful
good.
yeah.
Oh.
And what you did was was a very
yes, his parents.
I've heard stories of engineering, especially a
Oh
lot of
my,
stories like that.
my! They can be.
People get into their own research.
Oh,
and things, and
he was.
yeah.
He's a brilliant
Yeah, and
man.
they don't really mean to ignore the students.
No,
but
he
they
did
do.
not have
Yeah.
that kind of a personality
Yeah.
at all. But he also had a drive, which you had to have because that was how you got your money. And it was just a bad situation, and he just didn't realize it. And I told him, I says, I'm sorry, but you've got to spend some time with that boy. And he did. And that boy finished his schooling. And
you just hope that someone else carried on some of the things that you...
Well, they hired a young girl in my place, and she lasted 6 months. And I went over there one time, and she said to me, how did you do this? And I says, well, what do you mean? She says, it is so much work. I says, well, you stay till the job is done. If you have to come in early, you do it. I was my own boss and my professor, so I have a book in there. You can't believe the things they had to say that was just beautiful. And I always called them my professors. They thought that was really neat. And it was true. I worked for them. And one day, this one professor, he became the dean at the Denver of engineering, and he says, you don't work for me, you work with me. And I says, okay. From then on, I worked with them. Yeah.
What year did you retire?
Pardon?
What year did you retire?
20 years ago. 20 years ago in February. That's end of this month.
Do you ever see any of your professors?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes, I do. Yes, I do. And there are 6 of us girls that worked in engineering. We meet every month. We call ourselves the Golden Girls. And we go to lunch, and we have done some of the most wonderful things. One year, on my 60th birthday, my husband ordered a limousine, and with the most gorgeous driver that you had ever seen. And he came to the house and picked us up, and we drove to Estes Park and had breakfast at the Stanley, and champagne and orange juice along the way. It was simply wonderful. We've gone to many plays. We've been to the Brown Palace for high tea. We've been plays all over, just done a lot of fun things.
Do any of them live in Louisville?
No, they're all Boulder girls.
What about your friends in Louisville? Do you
I still
get
have
together
my
with
high
them?
school. Oh, yes, all my high school friends, yeah. Our friends are all, yeah. See, there were a bunch of us that got married around the same time. In 1953 is when we got married. And from then on, there were a lot of people that got married. And we're all, now one couple, both of them are dead now, but the Leggett's, our kids all grew up together, and they knew each other.
Yeah.
The Szymanskis, Art and Trudy Szymanski, their kids and our kids all grew up together. The Shalinos, these were all our high school friends, and we still, we're there for each other.
Yeah. So do you go like to the Elks Club or any of those?
We belong
groups?
to
I know
the
some
Elks,
of
but
them
we
have.
do not go. Now, why we belong, I really could not tell you. It's a donation, but we belong.
Yeah, just where people.
They started the Italian Club, and we were one of the first members of the Italian Club. I don't enjoy the politics that goes along with some of those little clubs. Who wants to be this, and who wants recognition for that? And that doesn't set with me. It doesn't. So we dropped out after the first year. And it's going beautifully. It sure didn't hurt it at all. But it just is not my
Well, it's not your thing.
Not my thing. Now, my husband would enjoy it, but he wouldn't go without me. And so, unfortunately.
So what are some of the major changes that you've seen in Louisville through all these years?
20,000 people. Too many people. I will never forget, this is probably about in early 80s. They were building these houses up the street, and this woman came to the house with a clipboard. And she says, she told me what her name was and what she was doing, and she says, would you mind signing a petition to stop them building these houses up there? And I looked at her and I says, well, and where do you live? And she says, well, I'm at the end of McKinley. And I says, well, I wonder if someone had come to my house then and asked me to sign a petition. That's when I should have signed it, because then you wouldn't be here. And I says, as far as I'm concerned, the door is open, and there's nothing we can do about it.
Yeah.
You know what a beautiful little town we have, and you're not going to stop anybody from coming here.
But what you still have is wonderful neighborhoods and.
Oh my, yes.
Yeah.
This lady, the couple that live in this house next door, they moved here 5 years ago. And he was an accountant, has a very interesting life. Oh, he came from the Ukraine. And the Germans killed his father. He saw them kill the father. And the mother took her 2 sons and walked over a mountain at night to get out of that town. They left everything. And she had a relative on the other side. Then she found a sponsor in a church here in the United States. He came here. He was 18. His brother was 20. He worked at a cheese factory, washing. He's just a little guy. Washing out the big barrels for cheese. It was in Indiana, I think, is where it was. And he said one day the boss called him in and says, do you like your job here? Oh, very much. Yes, very much. He says, well, I'm giving you a promotion. He says, you're doing a good job. He says, wonderful. He says, I thought maybe I was going to start making cheese now. He says, no. He says, I got the bigger pots to wash. They gave him a 10-cent an hour raise. He was making 35 cents an hour. But he was smart. He joined the service. He became an American citizen. He joined the service. And he has been a very, very successful businessman. Traveled the world, owned homes in France. They own a place in Florida. They came from Connecticut. Their daughter owns those farms over on that big farm, organic farm, in Boulder.
Over in Baseline or?
No,
Arapahoe?
it's, can't think, I'm a blank right now. But they own a great big farm. The man she married, his family owned the land. And so they bought this house, and she loves it here. She wants to live right here on this block. She just thinks the world.
So the immigrants are still coming to Louisville.
Oh yes, and he thinks
that's interesting.
And then they had some friends came from Europe. They went and took a month's vacation. They went to Germany, France, Italy, all over for a month. And they had some friends from Germany that came here, and boy, did they fall in love with Louisville. They just thought it was great.
You know, we're gonna have to close off soon, but I wanted to get one thing in before we do. You went to Italy at least once, your whole family?
No.
Oh, I was thinking you had gone over.
No, I always wanted my dad to go. My mom and dad and my aunt and uncle had a trip planned to go to Italy the year my mother died.
Oh, okay.
And my dad would never go back. And when my father came to this country, he never spoke Italian in the house. I'm an American, and I speak English. He had a friend when he was older, and this man had told my father that he sure was stupid. Those were his words. Because he didn't turn over his property and stuff to his children so that he could have gotten aid to live. And my dad kicked him out of his house and never spoke to him again. He says, I came here to take care of myself. If I could help other people, that was even better. But I didn't come here wanting the government to take care of me. That is the pride he had. He was so honored to be an American citizen.
That's a wonderful time to stop, if you don't mind. I think that's
really
a wonderful,
was.
wonderful story. Your family and extended families, just sort of the stories that made Louisville.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
We had, our daughter was in a very bad accident, the oldest one, when she was 17. Dick and I had gone to Estes Park for our anniversary, and she had been hit and was in the hospital. And we came home, and this whole yard and everybody was in this house. And my niece was here from California, his brother that lives in California. And she says, Aunt Birch, how did these people know? And I says, honey, this is Louisville. Everybody knows. And when our daughter died, it was the same thing.
Yeah.
I mean, we had people in here for a month. Just, it was a very shocking.
supportive.
Oh, my. Horrible.
And just today you had your walk shoveled by a neighbor.
By a neighbor. That's the kind. Yeah.
So it's still happening.
We've done a lot for people, too.
Yeah.
And I think it's what it's all about. You give and you take. You know, in that movie, Oh God, when the little girl asked God, why did you take my friend? He says to her, if I hadn't had her be born, she would never have been your friend. And she says, yeah. So he says, you have life and you have death. You have good and you have bad. And that's how it is. That's how our lives are. You have to be. My favorite saying to my grandkids when they walk out the door, be kind. Kindness matters.
Yeah.
That is my favorite expression.
Thank you, Virginia. This has
You're
been
welcome.
wonderful.
Yeah.
Kindness matters.
The sunlight.